Chapter 28, Section 3, Adjusting to a Post-War Peace. By 1946, the balance of power in the world was shifting. Two global wars and the destruction of economic infrastructure had greatly weakened formerly strong countries such as Britain, France, and Germany. The United States and the Soviet Union now stood alone as leading powers in the world. Their size, economic strength, and military prowess enabled them to dominate global affairs. They became known as superpowers, nations that influence or control less powerful states. Most nations chose or were forced to align with one superpower or the other. The world was dividing into two power blocks. Tensions rise between two superpowers. In February 1946, Stalin gave a speech attacking capitalism. He declared that peace was impossible as long as capitalism existed. He said that capitalist nations would always compete with one another for raw materials and markets for their products, and that such conflicts would always be settled by armed force. War, he said, was inevitable under the present capitalist conditions of world economic development. He seemed to suggest that communism should replace capitalism. George Kennan, a U.S. diplomat at the American Embassy in Moscow, studied Stalin's speech and sent a long reply to the U.S. Secretary of State. This long telegram, as it became known, helped shape U.S. foreign policy for decades to come. In it, Kennan described the Soviets as being committed fanatically to the belief that U.S. system and the way of life must be destroyed if Soviet power is to be secure. To prevent this outcome, he said, the Soviet Union must be contained within its present borders. After he returned to the United States, Kennan expanded on this notion in an article for a foreign policy journal. In that article, he wrote, "It is clear that any United States policy toward the Soviet Union must be that of a long-term, patient, but firm and vigilant containment of Russian expansive tendencies." Kennan later pointed out that he viewed the policy of containment, the restriction of Soviet expansion, as a political strategy, not a military one. He did not want war. He felt that in time, containment would lead to either communism's collapse or its transformation into a milder, less hostile system. By the time Kennan wrote his famous telegram, U.S. leaders had grown very uneasy. They feared that the USSR planned to spread communism beyond Eastern Europe to other parts of the world. These concerns deepened in March 1946, when the Soviets refused to withdraw troops from northern Iran. During the war, Britain and the Soviet Union had shared control of Iran. In refusing to leave, the Soviets ignored a 1942 agreement with Britain stating that both countries would withdraw within 6 months of the war's end. This action generated the first major post-war crisis. It ended peacefully after the USSR gave in to U.S. pressure and withdrew. Tensions, however, were clearly rising. New nuclear technologies raised the stakes for both sides. Conflicts between nations have always prompted fears of war. In the new age of the atomic bomb, the possible effects of a superpower conflict became even more frightening. The threat of a nuclear attack compelled both countries to show restraint in their use of force, but it also fueled the race to develop nuclear weapons. After World War II, the United States continued to test and improve its nuclear capability. In the summer of 1946, American scientists conducted tests of 2 atomic bombs at Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands of the Pacific Ocean. Scientists studied the impact of atomic bombs on naval vessels, using a fleet of more than 90 battleships and aircraft carriers as targets. Many battleships were old, some were captured enemy ships. Nuclear testing on Bikini Atoll continued into the 1950s. For 3 years, the United States was the only country with an atomic bomb. But Soviet scientists were working hard to develop their own atomic weapon. Turning to the United Nations to mediate conflicts. Truman and his advisors knew the damage an atomic bomb could do, and they sought ways to control this powerful new weapon. They asked the United Nations to help limit the development and use of atomic energy, the power released by nuclear reaction. In June 1946, Truman sent a key advisor, Bernard Baruch, to the United Nations to explain U.S. goals to the UN Atomic Energy Commission. He told the panel that the United States wanted the United Nations to enact strict controls on raw materials used in bomb making, and a ban on the making of any future bombs. Baruch's proposal, known as the Baruch Plan, would allow the United States to retain its small nuclear stockpile for the time being. However, it would deny the Soviet Union and other nations the right to build bombs. The plan called for UN inspections of nuclear plants and stiff sanctions on nations found making such weapons. Under the plan, UN Security Council members would not be allowed to use their veto power to prevent UN sanctions. The Baruch Plan prompted strong opposition from the Soviet Union. Soviet delegate Andrei Gromyko asked why the United States should be allowed to keep its atomic bombs while denying the Soviet Union the right to develop its own weapons. He declared that further talks on international control of atomic weapons could take place only after the United States destroyed all of its atomic weapons. Until then, he refused to discuss the terms of the Baruch Plan. He also declared that the Soviet Union would not give up its veto power in the Security Council. Because neither side would budge, this early effort at nuclear arms control came to an end.